everybody, thank you for tuning in to Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim Jousma joining you here, and this week we have ourselves a very special guest. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jennifer, and I do like a little video review on YouTube called Comics Will Break Your Heart. And I also co-host Longbox Paradox with my friend Dan.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know if I put it on the Facebook page yet. I know I've commented it on my regular Facebook, but definitely checked out your videos. Called it a hipster reading rainbow, and it really does have that feel, which I like.
You know, I think the term or the label hipster has kind of like that, not a bad connotation, a negative connotation, a little bit. I really appreciate it. Reading Rainbow is very special to me, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, that show is definitely special to me, too. I actually met LeVar Burton's mother once when I worked at an Apple store in Sacramento, so that was fun.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway,
Very nice.
Yeah, so the first time we have somebody on the show, we always ask one question, so I will ask that question of you right now. What is your nerd origin story? Let the folks know.
You know, I wish that I had one that was a little bit cooler. Like, I got bit by a radioactive comic book nerd and, you know, just went from there. But I feel like my kind of like comic book nerd story, because that's what I consider myself, like a comic book nerd more than anything else. I was introduced to the works of Neil Gaiman with stuff like Neverwhere and Stardust, and then I ended up getting into the comic book stuff. I actually had a teacher in high school who was really into comic books, and he graciously lent me a lot of the really popular ones, a lot of Batman ones, Fables, Transmetropolitan, and Dawn. So I ended up getting a little bit of a taste of everything, mostly the indie stuff rather than like the big two with Marvel and DC.
Right.
So that's kind of where like my comic book nerd North Star is going to be in the more indie stuff, not necessarily like the big two.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of the opposite when it comes to comics. It's primarily the big two, and then discovering stuff that, like, my favorite artists or writers did on the indie scene. But we all got to start somewhere. So,
for sure.
Yep.
For sure. And I think as a weird kid when I was younger, because that's who I was, I still am a little bit of a weird kid. I think that comic book trope of being a weird person kind of living on the fringes, that spoke to me as well. So I found a lot of common ground with a lot of those things.
Oh yeah. All right. Speaking of comic books, this has definitely been an interesting week for the comic book community. I came across Tess Fowler. I don't know if I'm sure you're familiar with her, of course.
Mm-hmm.
She had quite the interesting thread going this week, kind of detailing some abuse that her fellow some of her male comic book creators have been, unfortunately, been doing over the past number of years. Probably goes back to the dawn of time, unfortunately. But that's one thing we wanted to talk about this week. Did you get a chance to see that, or were you looking at other threads that talked about it that kind of blossomed from that?
I've seen a lot more of the stuff that blossomed from it. When I think about Tess Fowler, I know that there's a comic book near and dear to my heart, Rat Queens, which came out in like 2013, 2014 maybe. And I don't know if you know about what happened with Rat Queens, but so it's basically like a woman troupe of D&D like mercenaries, and they're just raucous, and they party and do drugs, but they're going on quests, and it's a really incredible story. However, the artist on it, Rock Upchurch, got accused of domestic violence, was taken off this particular comic book, and was replaced by, I can't recall the artist's name, but then Tess Fowler took over, and she was actually, after doing a run of the volume, she ended up kind of getting kicked off without her knowledge and with no forewarning.
Hmm.
So I'm a little bit more familiar with that, and I know that Tess Fowler is going through cancer treatments right now. So I know a little bit about that, but I actually haven't seen a lot of what she has to say about the sexual harassment allegations this week.
Yeah, her thing was, I mean, yeah, she's going through breast cancer right now, going through chemo. She's been open about a lot of her experiences with sexual abuse, in her personal life, as well as dealing with stuff in the industry. And I think the thread I'm referring to that she talked about was just more of her, like, I am giving up trying to play nice. It is time to open the doors and let these people be held accountable for their actions. And I know some of the people that she mentioned, like on the list, Warren Ellison. Who else was on that list? Let me bring it up.
Cameron Stewart's one that's recent.
Yeah.
I know of a few other names from previous. I don't know. The two that I'm more keenly aware of that have been talked about this week are Cameron Stewart and Warren Ellis. I know in the past people like Brian Wood have come up, and it's really disheartening to see so many names on there.
Yeah, she had Brian Wood was on the list, Scott Lobdell, Scott Alley, Eddie Berganza, Eric Esquivel. And I'm sure there are others that other people have mentioned, but that was some of the names that she mentioned. I know there was an article that she posted from BuzzFeed about an editor that worked at DC for over a decade that had numerous complaints about being inappropriate with, female employees at Disney, but he's getting promotion upon promotion, and then these women are essentially out of the business because they dared raise their voice.
And that seemed to be one of the common threads of a lot of this that was going on. Some of the behavior is that this older gentleman that was established in the industry reached out specifically to younger female creators trying to get into the comic book industry. In Cameron Stewart's particular instance, he was 36, and some of the other young women were 16, 17 years old.
Yeah.
And they would reach out and, oh, here's my email, here's my number, let's talk. I know you want to be in the industry. And then that talk would turn from less innocent to more risky and using predatory and grooming practices. For anyone unfamiliar with what grooming practices are, it's basically a strategic way to treat a person that you want to take advantage of by grooming them with specific behaviors, making them feel special and, oh, this is our secret and you can't tell anyone. And so those practices seem to be used by a lot of these men on younger women trying to get in the industry.
Yeah, and, I know people like Warren Ellis, like you mentioned, he did, let me bring it up on his Twitter here, but he did come up with a bit of what you can call an apology, but I'll read his statement right here. It says, recent statements have been made about me that need to be addressed. I have never considered myself famous or powerful, yet he's writing comic books with his name splashed on. To the point where I've made a lot of bad jokes about it for 20 odd years. It had never really occurred to me that other people didn't see it the same way, that I was not engaging as an equal when gifted with attention, but acting from a position of power and privilege. I did not take that into account in a number of my personal interactions, and that was a mistake, and I own it. Still, talking... Yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, he's on record making a lot of inappropriate comments to very young girls that, the guy that age should know you don't say that type of stuff to the young girls, and just essentially putting it on them, it sounds like, to be upset about. But go ahead.
So I didn't read that particular thing on Twitter, but he did or does. I I don't think that he will do it any longer, but he has a weekly newsletter that comes out on Sundays, which was called Orbital Operations, was Warren Ellis's weekly newsletter, and I've been following it for several years now. It would be something that every Sunday I'd be like, oh, am I going to get this? Am I going to get an email from Daddy Warren? And every Sunday I really looked forward to it because it chronicles not only some of his writing journeys into the things that he's doing in Netflix, but he would also talk about the things that he's reading. And even about 2-3 weeks ago, he sent out his newsletter, and he referred to his career as a middling career. And as someone who I really looked up to in the industry, he's written some of my favorite stories, Planetary, Transmetropolitan, Injection. He's just written so many incredible stories, I can't even begin to finish listing them off. But to one a couple weeks ago, feeling like he referred to his career as a middling career, and then this week to see a lot of the allegations against him, it was heart-wrenching. Not just, obviously more so because I feel for the women. I believe the women, and I think that we need to take some time to listen to what they have to say before we make any judgments, because I think that's our first thing, is that we jump to a conclusion, or we think that we've figured it out, even though we have no involvement in it. I'm just here as a comic book consumer. And I read, I knew that I figured he was going to come out with a statement, since he does do his weekly newsletters. I'm like, okay, what's he going to say? And he finally did one. I believe it came out on Friday, in which he referred to this, and it was an apology that wasn't really an apology, and it was basically, I guess I did this stuff, but I wasn't aware that I did it, and oops. That's kind of how it felt.
Yeah, I mean, that's the impression I got. Because he had a little bit more to say, of course, but I didn't feel the need to kind of go through everything he said, because to your point, it was just like, oh, did I do bad? I mean, it just, it's not taking into account the severity of his actions. I mean, we're not talking about, when you're talking about somebody that is, doing the grooming thing, talking to, young teenage women, to get something sexually out of them, that's not inappropriate comments in a workplace, which are equally as bad, but that's somehow flipping it worse. And just his statement was, ew, just all levels of gross.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of what I've heard from some people, or at least the cesspool that is Twitter, is that, oh, well, in these cases, they didn't do anything wrong. It's not like they actually went over a line. It's not like they, at least in some of these cases, it's not like they, quote unquote, did anything to these women. They just were having conversations, and they just misconstrued it and this and that. And my perspective is that every single sexual predator, every single person who has committed sexual assault probably does these things, is that this is the first step towards what the next step is. So I think that if these men who were in a position of power, if they were able to take the next step, they probably would have, knowing that they wouldn't have been held accountable. And now, because obviously this has been happening for a very long time, it's just now we have kind of an open platform, and people are now being held accountable.
Yeah, and to your point, when it comes to Twitter, I did notice there were some comics professionals, I believe, what's his name, Patch Zerkner, don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he's one of the people that have come out and tried to defend some of the people being accused, and other people have been, well, we can't believe this, when statistics show that maybe 4% of allegations like this turn out to be false. If 10 people are saying something and only one person is lying, I'm going to believe the 9 people that are saying, something is happening.
Yeah, and especially when we think about how, I think the statistic is something around 1 in 3 women, and I'm using this statistic as a woman, and I do think that this disproportionately happens to women. However, this does not exclude men or non-binary people, because it is very pervasive. However, the statistic that I'm aware of is something like 1 in 3 women will at some point in their life be affected by sexual assault, whether that's harassment, whether that's rape, whatever that might be. About 1 in 3 women will experience it, and that is horrific. The number should be 0. However, when we do think about cases like, I think about Brock Turner. A couple years ago, he was caught in the act of raping a young woman behind a building, and ended up getting 6 months in prison, even though there were witnesses, even though he basically admitted to it. He got 6 months in prison. And when we think about false accusations, why would a woman go through all of that for a false accusation? I'm not saying false accusations don't happen, but for the emotional struggle that a woman would have to go through the legal system, to go through testing, it's a lot. I don't think very many women would accuse at all.
And I agree with that too, because one, a false allegation that most false allegations, the rare ones that I've seen, are usually snuffed out right away by people, or by people that do come to the defense of the person, stating, that never happened, and here is the proof why. And two, it's one of those deals like people that like voting in terms of, the Republicans always want to talk about, there's voter fraud and all that, but where is the benefit of breaking that, of someone that falsely makes a vote that they should not have? Where is the benefit? It's not like robbing a bank where you get an immediate benefit, where you get a bunch of cash. There's no benefit to lying about this. So why? It's I feel horrible that women have to have this beyond of a defense, I guess, in terms of being able to prove it. And you still get people that want to diminish them for coming up with screenshots or whatever. It's frustrating to see, because especially in comic books, that should be the one safe area where people are able to be themselves. And
true, and I think the same people who scream false accusation don't give a shit about actual accusations. They really don't care about a woman's opinion anyways. So even if there were, and using air quotes here, legitimate, I don't think that they care about legitimate cases either.
I agree with that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is... we have to listen to women on this, because for far too long, women have been told to go through the proper channels, but then the proper channels do not work for them. Call the police if something bad is happening. But there was a graphic that I came across that kind of showcased the statistics when it comes to cops and rape, in terms of how many women are raped compared to how many are actually are able to call the cops, compared to how many are brought to trial. And that number gets really, really small the further along the justice route that it is. So it's just like people that question whether these are legitimate or not are... it's what do women have to do to prove that this is happening?
Yep, exactly. And the sad thing is, unfortunately, that most people who experience sexual assault are experiencing it from a person that they know. Not just a person that they know, but a person that's in a very close circle to them, who they care, whom they love, and who they trust. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, because of course a stranger can do these things, but more often than not, it's going to be someone that you know. And I think that makes it harder for a woman or for anyone to come forward with the allegations. And, people may think, well, if I tell on this person, what are the ramifications they're going to see? They're going to lose their job and they're going to lose their livelihood. And I think that becomes the mentality of people. For instance, Brock Turner, who we see, well, he was going to be a sports star. I forget if it was like tennis or golf or something like that.
I think it was like swimming.
Swimming, it was something. So, he's a very talented sports kid, and he's going to go places, and this is just going to hurt those opportunities. And so we care more about their opportunities than we do a woman's livelihood and just listening to her story. And it does hurt because it's painful listening to these stories. It's very painful to listen to a lot of these, even if it's over tweets. Man, it's been painful reading a lot of these stories in the comic book industry, because it's a pretty small, tight-knit community where a lot of people know each other, and it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, just going to conventions alone. I mean, these are people you run into all the time, and some of the stories I read on Twitter were about women that talked about dreading going to certain conventions because they know certain people would be there. And I guess the artists and comic books folks, when they're not on the floor at their table, selling their stuff, I guess they're able to kick back in special dressing rooms depending on where the convention is. But then having to avoid all that, just really tough. Now I'll ask you, as a woman, what are some things that guys can do to support? Guys hear stories like this. What can we do to support?
There's a part of me, and I think that this is the same. I think this is part of a larger conversation that we're even having about race relations as well. As a white woman, and even as a white woman who I feel like I have been an ally to the Black community and to communities of color, where I feel like a lot of the suggested reading books and, watch this documentary. Like, I feel like I've been on the forefront. Like, I've watched those documentaries. I've read all those books. And so I'm finding that even me personally, I'm complicit in my non-anti-racism. So I'm not a racist, but am I being a good enough anti-racist? So I think that same conversation that we're having about race is something that we also need to have for women in general. And even to go back to one of my favorite books is Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. And it basically talks about how the link between race relationships here in America is linked to the prison industrial system, and as well as war profiteering, as well as Palestinian relationships in the Middle East, and how they're all interconnected. So I do think a lot of the conversations that we're having about race right now are pretty applicable to gender relationships that we're seeing in this. Now, when I think about men being a better ally to women, I think that the first step is educating yourself, and whether that be educate yourself on the statistics, listen to these women that are coming forward. And I think that there needs to be a good balance, and I go back and forth between myself with this when I think about being a better ally with race relationships is, do I maintain friendships with people who are racist? And there's a part of me, like there is a liberal hippie in me who is like, we can be friends with everyone and we can solve everything with love, and all I need to do is bring these people in closer and just hug them a little bit tighter and show them that I can be the better person. And there is another vindictive person in me that also says, do not break bread with the enemy. And if you are a racist, you do not deserve a seat at the table. So I think that there does need to be some sort of a blend between the two, where there are certain people that you may feel like you can reach out to. You can have the conversation of, don't do this. And there is also another part where it needs to be, don't rape people. Like, if you are accused of it, I don't want you at my table. I don't want to be associated with you in any way. And I think that that is a bigger threat to people, because if we just think, oh, if I do these things, then I can get away with it and people are just going to smack me on the hand. But if people know that I'm going to be ostracized from my community, there's a bigger threat. And I think that there does need to be some sort of balance between that, where we have a conversation with people in the industry that this is not acceptable. I know I'm going on a little bit of a rant here, but when all of the stuff about Warren Ellis came out, one of the thoughts that I had was about, I kind of thought about Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction, who actually met on a Warren Ellis forum like chat, and got together, got married. And I was kind of waiting. I saw Kelly Sue DeConnick post something on Twitter like, okay, I'm listening. And just yesterday she posted something on Instagram and kind of went over some of her feelings, and it felt good to hear from her, even though I'm not owed anything to, she doesn't have to respond at all.
Right.
But one thing that she mentioned is that in the publishing industry, specifically the book publishing industry, where there's kind of a system that you need to go through in order to get your foot in the door. And basically, if you want to become an author in the traditional book publishing industry, you buy a market guide and you submit stuff to an agent, and that agent then goes to a publisher and submits your work. So it's a lot more about the work that you're doing rather than the person that you know, or the people who help open the door so you can get your foot in. Where in the comic book industry, a lot of times it's about who you know and how you can get into the industry. You've just got to be at the right place at the right time. Maybe see someone at a convention. Conventions are huge for people getting their foot into the door and getting their work seen by editors, getting their work seen by people who collaborate. So I think that 2-3-step plan. First, you got to talk about it. 2, you've got to ostracize people who are complicit. And then 3, I think that we need to have some sort of checks and balances in the comic book industry, where we're not so much reliant on who you know and having to go through horrific events to feel like you have to get your foot into the door. So those would be, in my opinion, in Jennifer's 3-step plan, that would be the start.
That's a good campaign slogan. My 3-step plan.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the ostracization too, for folks that want to defend the people being accused right now, if this happened, if this type of behavior happened at a McDonald's, somebody's going to get fired. They're not going to be able to continue to make Happy Meals while there are allegations that they're abusing their power of making Happy Meals, to make the lives of their fellow employees bad, So it needs to be the same for the comic book industry as well. And we shouldn't be having conversations about, what about this person losing their livelihood? Because if they didn't do this, they wouldn't have to worry about the consequences of their behavior. If 20, 30 years down the road, someone like a Warren Ellis is able to show, I learned my lesson, blah, 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 then, we can have that discussion then. But let's not talk about his redemption arc right now. Let's support the women who have not been able to get in the industry because they didn't respond to these advances. Let's, amplify the voices of women that have tried to get their stories out, whether it's, stories about stuff like this or just, their work, trying to get their work out. Let's support more women,
I don't know if it could even be something like, this is like part 4 to my 3-part plan, but even if there could be some type of unionization or guild structure where it's basically a community I don't want to use the term policing, but community that's helping guide or push aside people that are accused. Because to your point, when we think about if this was a McDonald's or if this was a quote-unquote traditional workplace, then these people would be fired. Hopefully, a lot of times that doesn't happen.
Right.
Anyways, but I think that if there was some type of guideline or if there was some type of comic book union or creators union, something like that, that could say this person is no longer part of our union. And if, DC, Marvel, Image, IDW, Dark Horse, if all of these publishers said, we are not going to work with anyone unless you're part of one of these unions, and then these unions said, we only contract these people and, zero tolerance policy. You break it and you're out of here, man. I don't know if there could ever be something like that. But if there could be, I think that would be a step in the right direction. Now, will that keep it from happening? No, I don't think that will ever be prevented from happening. But I think that if we did have some sort of system of checks and balances, it would work. But right now, most creators, whether they're artists or writers, colorists, letterers, whatever, they are just like freelance contractors. Mm-hmm. So there's not much in the way of regulation there.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that the comics industry isn't associated with like the Writers Guild of America or some other similar type of organization, because to your point, it would help for situations like this, and also on the flip side for other labor-related stuff. It would help them in terms of getting better royalties from the big two, at least, in making sure that with the smaller companies they're able to get their money, not get screwed, and all that stuff. But that's a different topic for a different day. All right, we are going to move on to our next topic here. One of our regular one of our regular segments is our top 5 favorite. And with Jen joining us this week, what we are going to do is talk about our top 5 favorite comic book movie adaptions. And like we do on the show here, we're going to go back and forth. I will give one of my choices. Jen will give one of her choices. And then we will just talk about why we chose those particular subjects. So what was the first on your list, Jen?
So do you want me to start with the top 5 or the first one?
What do you mean?
Like, do you want me to go with number 5 first or number 1 first?
That's
up. Just kind
of. Yeah, I mean, I don't have. I mean, I'm not one that has to like rank. Like my 5 list is just my 5. It's not like in order of 5, 4, 3, 2.
Got it.
Yeah. So
when I do think of mine in the way that I have it written down, I usually go like bottom to top. So I would say like one of my top 5. And maybe it's because with a lot of things going on in the world, and this movie was put on Netflix recently, and I feel like it was a very pertinent choice, and that's V for Vendetta. The comic book is written by Alan Moore, and if for anyone who has not watched the movie, has not read the comic book, it definitely goes into politics, especially for like extreme politics, thinking of like 1984 and like Big Brother and the political propaganda that you're given, and what is considered moral values. So V for Vendetta is a movie that I recently rewatched, and when we were like thinking about like what was the top 5 be, this movie immediately came to mind.
Nice. That is one I have not seen for whatever reason. With the Wachowskis, I mean, the only Wachowski movie that I've seen are going to be the three Matrix movies, and they did Bound. I saw that. That was a good movie, but I have not seen. I think that was. I know Natalie Portman was in that, and
Mm-hmm.
that was just around the. I believe that came out just after the Star Wars prequel trilogy, if I'm not mistaken, within a couple of
Mm-hmm.
years. And by that time, I'd had enough of Natalie Portman, So it's just like, I will catch it later. But
Speaking of Natalie Portman, it's so funny because in the Marvel movies, she plays Jane Foster. And for anyone who's not in the hip current, what's going on in the Marvel universe type stuff, um, Thor, Thor Odin's son, became unworthy, and Jane Foster actually took up the mantle of Thor. She's wielding Mjolnir, and I was actually very excited to hear that Jane Foster Thor is coming to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and simultaneously disappointed that it was going to be Natalie Portman playing Jane Foster, because I see her as Jane Foster in the movies. I get that. But when I think about Lady Thor, I don't think Natalie Portman, so we'll see on how that ends up.
yeah, I mean, for Thor 4, Love and Thunder, I mean, Taika Waititi has shown that he's one hell of a good director. I love his work, so I'm definitely excited for it. But yeah, to your point, she's just so school marmish. And I don't know if I can buy her wielding Mjolnir. I mean, I'm going to be first in line when that movie comes out, and I know I'm going to love it. But yeah, to your point, I don't, it's just like, maybe, maybe not. But, any, you're going to.
I definitely think that Taika Waititi, I love his movies. I loved Thor Ragnarok. I absolutely love What We Do in the Shadows, and Hunt for the Wilder People, love all of his movies. So I think that's going to be like my guiding force in the love for the movie.
Amen to that. All right. First one on my list is a classic. It gave me a tattoo. It gave me a t-shirt. And that's going to be Superman the movie from 1978. It's a classic. It's the movie that, without Superman, there are no comic book movies. It was the first movie that showed that you could throw a lot of money at these and come out with a quality product. The casting, Christopher Reeve was a godsend as Clark Kent, Superman. Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. I don't think there's not an actress I've seen that has been able to capture Lois Lane as well as what she did. Having said that, I do like the actress who is currently playing Lois Lane on Supergirl. I think she's captured the spirit of Lois Lane for me at least, and they're actually spinning off that Superman and Lois Lane into their own TV show. So I'm curious to see what that result's going to be. But an absolute classic. I mean, you can't really go wrong with Superman, even though I will say at times, especially at the beginning of the film, it can be a little slower than what people today are probably used to.
Yeah, I think too, when it comes to that era of superhero movies, what we had previously seen in like show adaptations is that it was a lot more of that like campy, like I think of like the campiness of Batman and things like that. So I think that kind of created a cultural shift into like the cinematics that we see now. I think it took a little bit and kind of took some winding turns and that like campiness to seriousness, but yeah.
Yep. All right, what's next on your list?
Next on my list is going to be The Crow, by J.O. Bard. I don't know how many people are familiar with some of the backstory with the actor being murdered on set for The Crow, and honestly, what a powerhouse we probably would have had with those movies. And there's a little bit of there were some things that were going to happen in the movie that ultimately didn't because of the tragedy that happened on set. but I recently went and rewatched The Crow, and man, it's such a beautiful movie, and I think that it really had that like dark tone of the time, especially considering some of the other like Batman movies that we had at the time. But The Crow was such a good adaptation of the book, and it really had that like dark, gothic, like rain and tragedy feel. And it's probably one of those movie soundtracks that is a part of my not I want to say childhood, but teenagerhood, middle schoolhood, whatever. So even the soundtrack was influential, and I just think about all the great music that I was exposed to because of that as well.
Yeah, that's one I have not seen, but definitely aware of everything that happened with the tragic passing of Brandon Lee. Actually, read an interview with an actor by the name of Michael. I believe his last name is pronounced Massey. He was the guy on set who pulled the trigger, and hearing his account of everything that happened was just so tragic, just something that didn't need to happen. And how, like, when he fired the gun and Brandon reacted the way they did, how everybody thought that Brandon was just acting when he wasn't, and just thinking about how just overall tragic that was. It's such a shame that we lost somebody so young. I mean, similar to his father. I mean, if Bruce Lee had lived, I mean, who knows how many great movies we would have had. And then Brandon Lee, I mean, that was his breakout. That was going to be his breakout role. And, who knows what would have happened after that. But, all right, next one on my list. I'm not a Tim Burton fan, but this is probably going to be one of the few Tim Burton movies that I'm going to like. The original Batman. His first Batman from 1989. Of course, there was an Adam West Batman TV show and movie in the 60s that were good, but just this overall, I loved it. Now, back in the day, and you're lucky you didn't have to deal with this, but back when home videos were on VHS tapes, sometimes you couldn't go to Blockbuster and rent them right away. So I ended up reading the novelization of the movie before actually seeing the movie. But, just Jack Nicholson overall is great. Gives one of my favorite, there's like a great line that he does, like in the museum scene where Vicky Vale just like says to him, "You're crazy." And he goes, "And I thought I was a Pisces." Just, the line deliveries that he has in that. Now, the Batman 1989 is really, apart from the names, has nothing to do with the comics. There's, no direct correlation, but it shows what you can do with a comic book movie as well. I definitely liked it. It would have been nice if they didn't film it entirely on set, because it looks like, there are 12 people living in Gotham City, but it's a classic for a reason.
I definitely, when I do think back to those Batmans, and even if you take a look at the Batmans through like the lens of the comic book source material, even though some of it's loosely based, to me there is almost like two different Gothams. There's the Gotham of like the Christopher Nolan, where yes, it's dark and it's gritty and it's this new type of villain. But back when like Tim Burton was doing that film, to me the world that we had with Batman really was those like Italian mob. Like those were the villains back then, where now we have like bank robber. I mean, like we had the Italian mob family. Like I think about like Long Halloween, which is one of my like absolute favorite Batman stories. But like there's such a like noir, like crime noir type of feel to it, and I think that Batman, like I have like serious like nostalgia for that.
Yeah, and you can't forget Jack Palance. You are my number one guy.
Yeah.
All right, what's your next one?
Alrighty, so my next one, and this one holds a very special place in my heart, but it's going to be Tank Girl. I remember watching Lori Petty, and man, like she just embodies this character for me. Even in some of the newer comic books, I I see and I hear Lori Petty playing Tank Girl. And Tank Girl is she's so much fun. She's so quirky, and there's not necessarily that there's been like different comic book iterations of her, but some of the styles in it being a little bit differently, and some of the stories, like, they're not like continuous really, they're just kind of like here and there. But the Tank Girl movie was just so good for its time. Once again, went back and rewatched it recently, and it still completely holds up.
Yeah, the soundtrack was really good too. Ice-T had a great song in there called Big Gun. And there's actually a cover of that song that's really good. There's a woman we've actually reviewed one of her albums on the show before, but her name is Kate Nix, did a cover of Big Gun from Ice-T and just knocked it out of the park. But just that's one I gotta put on my list to see someday as well. I haven't seen it, but I do remember some of the promotional material coming out, and Lori Petty in interviews so excited, like, I am Tank Girl, I am Tank. Yes, you are. All right, next one on my list came out in 2008 and was actually directed by the first woman to ever direct a Marvel movie, and that is Punisher Warzone. Have you ever seen that one?
No, I haven't.
It is a unique film, let's put it that way. It's a lot of it is inspired from Garth Ennis's run on the Punisher with the Punisher Max series, and and I'm sure you're familiar with his work, so you know it's not subtle. Lots of bloodshed everywhere, but Lexi Alexander. I mean, when I heard a woman was directing it, I had to check it out just because it's like in film school there is a proper parity of men versus women studying to be directors, but in Hollywood, unfortunately, men are the ones usually getting the jobs, especially in genre films. So when I heard a woman was directing it, I had to see it, and she directed one of the most faithful comic book adaptations I have ever seen. And just a lot of the action she was able to get into the movie was directly taken from, Garth Ennis's, words and pictures. The casting, Ray Stevenson played Frank Castle. He was great. Dominic West, I believe his name is, played Jigsaw. I forgot the guy. He was in the Green Mile. He was the shady jailer. He played Looney Bin Jim. He was really good in it. But they had this one scene where like this evil gang of meth abusing parkour people. Like there's like one point where they're like jumping over a building, and then like the middle guy does a jump, but then like a missile comes out of nowhere and blows the guy up, and that was all from Frank. And just it's a unique film. It's not for everybody, but if you don't mind a little over the top violence, you'll actually get a kick out of it.
Nice.
All right, what's your next one?
Alrighty, so for my next one, and this may be a little bit more like on the obscure side, even though it kind of sounds like most of mine are a little bit obscure anyways, but it's going to be Ghost World. If not a lot of people are like too familiar with it, but it's starring Thora Birch and Scarlett Johansson, and if I had to point to a movie that felt like it was my experience in high school, man, like Ghost World is it. And it's just this like slice of life between these two young women who graduate high school, and are they going to go to college? Are they just, going to get a job? And they're just quirky and they're weird. And this is one of the few, in my opinion, one of the few comic book movies that actually is better than the comic book itself. Like I enjoyed the comic book, but maybe it's just because of the almost dry humor of Ghost World of the movie that it just relates better on screen. And I can directly relate to, I have a very weird crush on Steve Buscemi, and I can directly relate this to Ghost World. So It once again, another one that just has a special place in my heart. It's a really great like coming of age story for young women, and I thought it was a great movie.
Who came out with the comic originally? Who were the creators on that?
I believe it was Daniel. What's his name? He did American Splendor, right? I'm trying to find my book right now behind me.
Oh, yeah.
But I believe it was Daniel Clowes.
Okay.
He also did art. There was like a kind of sequel to it, like a sequel that wasn't really a sequel, called Art School Confidential. Give me one moment and I can give you the exact.
Okay. Yeah, for folks at home, she's checking her massive comic book collection right now. One I am jealous of. I mean, so many shelves, so many comics.
It is a lot. It's kind of overwhelming when, for instance, right now I'm trying to locate something. I do have a lot of shelves, and I'll go ahead and give a, you can obviously see this, but I've also got some statues up here as well.
Oh, man.
On my top shelf. I do have a 400 square foot apartment.
Ooh.
So this takes up the majority of wall space in my tiny little apartment. And yeah, Ghost World is done by Daniel Clowes.
Okay.
Who he also, yeah.
Okay.
So, highly recommend that. And it's, is it Fantagraphic Books that I'm seeing? Yeah, Fantagraphic Books is the publisher.
Got it.
Of Ghost World.
All right. Next one on my list, not one you're going to call independent at all. I had to put this on here. Avengers Endgame. I'm not going to proclaim that it's the best comic book movie of all time, but for what it was able to accomplish, I mean, I just being in that theater opening night, I've said it on the show multiple times, just, being there with everybody screaming like it was sporting events, seeing people, myself included, openly weeping during the portal scene and everything, and Sterling, of course, he at one point at the beginning of the film, he had to use his dad voice for some people that were loud or something like that, but, everybody was screaming just for the community that company has created with with the speculation on future movies and whatnot. It's one heck of a movie. I mean, at this point, everybody's seen it, and it's going to be one of those cliche things. I don't know, but I just remember it for the opening night experience, and I will never forget it.
Oh, for sure, and especially thinking about the cultural impact that movies like that have had. How many people do you think would consider themselves comic book nerds or comic book geeks or whatever who have not stepped into a comic book store in the last 10 years? And I think that a lot of people really love these characters like Captain America and Iron Man, and it's like, when was the last time you read a comic book with one of those? And I think that especially the last 10 years of legacy that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has created, I think that they've done a really good job at not only getting people back into comic book stores and reading comic books, I think that it's created a lot more fans as well who never really felt like they could go into a comic book store. Now it's like, oh, okay, I actually want to go there and I want to see what's going on. With movies like, at least most of the Marvel Cinematic Universe leading up to Endgame, it's hard to pinpoint an actual comic book that you can take a look at the source material, and some of it, you can kind of see it in Infinity Gauntlet, but it's a little bit loosely based off of. Yeah. But for sure, the cultural impact that it has just resonated in the comic book industry.
Yeah, and that final battle just, I love that final battle too, because if you think about it and if you describe it to somebody, it really is like a 10-year-old playing with their action figures. It's like, and then Black Panther's going to kick somebody, and then Ant-Man's going to punch a flying dinosaur in the face, and then this, just it celebrates everything that is good about these characters, and I will always love that movie. So.
I'm not gonna lie. Whenever we see the scene when like all of the lady superheroes show up,
the A4 scene.
I openly weep like a child who dropped their ice cream. It's such a cool scene. So. I really enjoyed that.
And they were definitely planting seeds there for the future. Apparently there is an A-Force movie in the works. So something to look forward to there.
I'm so happy to hear that. A-Force is really cool, and I think that it does set up a lot of like different teams and different people to come along. One of my like thinking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and thinking about Thor, Love and Thunder. When I think about that, one of my favorite Marvel characters in the comic books is Angela, who is Thor's half-sister. I like my prediction. So I don't know if we need to come back to this, like when it does, come out. I wouldn't be surprised if in Love and Thunder, if we do see like a post-movie credit scene or post-credit scene with Angela showing up, because I just think that that's going to be like a perfect entryway to get Angela into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So Marvel, if you're listening, which you should be, please put Angela in the movies.
And if you're going to do that, put the Enchantress in the movies. We've had so much Thor with no Enchantress. We need the Enchantress.
Yeah.
All right.
100%. So, for my last pick, and I think when I think about like the cultural importance that this movie has had, and one of the books that really shifted the stories that we were telling about superheroes, and the movie adaptation for this one, I think Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. I think that there's not really many other comic book movies that really capture the spirit. I mean, granted, a couple of things were changed from the source material, but I think that Watchmen was so well done. And if you haven't watched the Watchmen HBO series, wow, is it so relevant more than ever right now. And so I would highly recommend that you go ahead and you watch Watchmen, read the comic book, go ahead and watch the HBO series, because the way that Watchmen talks about superheroes and like our immediate like love and gravitation towards loving superheroes, but ultimately at the end of the day, most superheroes, whether they are humans with superpowers or if they are semi-gods or whatever, they're flawed and they carry a lot of baggage, or the power gets to their head. So I think that was a conversation that we weren't really having about superheroes at the time, and Watchmen really did as a groundbreaking comic book. And there's a reason why two of Alan Moore's books are on my list, is because even though Alan Moore hates the comic book industry now, apparently, which I don't blame him, but I do think that his books have had a huge cultural impact for the last 30 years, the last 3 decades on the comic book industry.
Yeah, I'm not a Zack Snyder fan, so I didn't watch the Watchmen movie. And for folks that listen, I mean, we've talked about Snyder and, his involvement with DC before. If there are fans, great, enjoy those movies. They're just not for me. With Alan Moore, I do feel bad for him, because at the end of the day, he and Dave Gibbons were supposed to get the rights to the Watchmen series back at some point. It's just that DC never, if I'm not mistaken, I think what it's supposed to be is that once the original run of Watchmen, the comic, ended, then they would get the rights back. But DC has found ways to kind of bypass that by essentially reprinting it and reprinting it. And now we know for comic book fans, and if you haven't done so already, the DC Universe app is amazing, especially for the price. But, DC with Jeff Johns has come out with like the Doomsday Clock series, which incorporates the Watchmen characters into the DC Universe proper. And Alan Moore was screwed out of a lot, so I can understand why he would not want to have anything to do with comics. I did love his... did you ever see when he was on The Simpsons?
When he was on what?
On The Simpsons?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And Little Lulu? Yes.
Yeah, and how he had that scene where he ripped off his shirt, and if you rip off your shirt in The Simpsons, you're going to have super muscles everywhere. And how he was able to beat everybody up, but he liked that. But Alan Moore is a genius. You can't see anything more than that. I mean, even stuff like The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I mean, the comic book is amazing. The film was okay. I don't think it was as bad as people say it is, but it's like a good TV movie.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And I think for the time too, like that during that time, I think that there was like some changes happening with with studios and some special effects, and like digital post-production was kind of in, I don't want to say it's infancy, but I think that it wasn't where it needed to be for the things that were happening in that movie to be perfectly done by practical effects versus like special effects. So like I can see where the disconnect for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I don't think that it wasn't written with the source material in mind, more of just like movie producers and executives were like, let's try to just milk this while we can.
Yeah, we had this focus group put together, and they said which is, I hope some studio is, because I think the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is a great concept, and I think it would probably make a much better TV series than anything else, just because there's so much you can do with it, but because you're taking characters from books from the 18 and 19, early 1900s, I think there has to be some more time spent kind of educating the audience, because even though I would think comic book readers are probably more well-read than the average person, sometimes with the older characters, you probably do need a little bit more introduction than what a 90-minute movie is going to give you. All right. Last on my list, it took a while to come up with this one, but I had to put it on here. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Yep. Yeah, I mean, that cartoon was the best adaptation of Spider-Man I have ever seen. Whether it's the Peter Parker Spider-Man or the Miles Morales. And the beauty of it, too, is that it wasn't even... it's the filmmakers did their own things with Miles in the movie, which I liked, but it was still very much quite the faithful adaptation. And if Sony were brave enough, I mean, I think the concept of the Spider-Verse could allow them to do a lot more wacky stuff. I mean, because why not bring Sam Raimi back and Tobey Maguire back to do a proper Spider-Man 4? Just call it a Spider-Verse movie, and I mean, They could do so much more than that. And a Spider-Ham. I mean, I would love to see a Spider-Ham movie or a TV show or something like that. But
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of celebrated the creativity that the comic books can give you. So I had to put it on my list. So that is our top 5 favorite. Go ahead.
When I think about the like even some of the little things when I went and saw into the Spider-Verse, like, not gonna lie, teared up during the movie, because like I have nephews who like look like Miles Morales, and they're young kids, and like they don't have, I mean, they do have a lot of superheroes to look up for, but maybe not a lot of like superheroes that look like them. Yeah. So it's really cool for me to see them seeing someone who looks like them, because like they've dressed up as Spider-Man before. But one of my favorite parts of Spider-Man is that soundtrack. Like that soundtrack, I don't think that if it was a non-animated movie, it could have been the same. Like, it just has a different feel. And even there's a couple of like little Easter eggs in the movie, if you didn't notice. Like, Spider-Man is looking through his phone, and one of the contacts, I believe, is B. Bendis, and another one is S. Pichelli. So for those of you who don't know, Brian Michael Bendis wrote Miles Morales, and Sarah Pichelli drew the Spider-Man. So, like, even to see little like Easter eggs in the movie, like, I screamed when I saw that.
Did you see I love the Easter egg once Dr. Octopus came to Aunt May's house and she burst through the door, and I loved how Aunt May turned to her and goes, "Live." Because it's a little Easter egg that people did not necessarily catch, because in the comic books, Dr. Octopus and Aunt May had a bit of a romance. And it was hinted that the female version of Dr. Octopus in this movie and Aunt May had a bit of a romance too, and things ended badly. So it was great to see that little callback. But it was just a little things they did well, and one of the few good underplayed Nicolas Cage roles.
I was never a big fan of Nicolas Cage. Like, he had played, like, National Treasure was just never really on my radar.
Right.
However, I did watch Nicolas Cage in Mandy, and that is a performance I will never forget ever in my life.
I heard that was pretty wacky. It would take a lot to kind of top what he did in Face Off. Did you ever see that?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a minute. I probably watched that movie when I was in high school, so it's been, I don't want to say 20 years, but yeah.
It's been over 20 years since it came out. So, a late 90s action classic. But anyway, that is our top 5 favorite for this week. Now we are going to transition to our album of the week. Jennifer, tell folks what album you chose for us.
So this album I chose, to be honest, I know a little bit about why I chose it, but Diamond Dogs by David Bowie.
Nice.
Was my pick of the week. And when we were talking about this, I'm like, man, I feel like I'm having an identity crisis. Whenever I think about like having to like choose something, I'm like, what album would define me for this particular like podcast episode? And I have listened to this album, but I don't think that I've ever really taken that introspective look at this, or this analytic view of Diamond Dogs in the way that I did for this episode. So it gave me like a new appreciation for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is I was so happy when you chose this. Yeah, because sometimes, I mean, with the album choices, sometimes if somebody else is picking and they like music that you don't necessarily like, that can make this part of the show sometimes a little tough to get through. But Diamond Dogs is probably one of my favorite Bowie albums from first track to last. Just kind of a great showcase for his creativity. I mean, how many people sit back and think, I'm going to make a musical based off of 1984, actually do it, and then have it be popular and have it where songs that people can relate to on it. But kind of a transitional record for him as well, because he was kind of shedding off the glam rock period. The album after this was Young Americans, of course. What do they call it? The Plastic Soul period, or the Thin White Duke period. But this album right here, one hell of a legend. Like we do with our album reviews, we do go track by track here, and then kind of go with our thoughts on the track, what stuck out positive, what stuck out negative, and then go from there. So now this album too, kind of like stuff like Sgt. Pepper, a lot of the songs kind of blend in, and even though there are a number of tracks on here, some of them kind of encompass like one suite. So we'll go based on how they're supposed to be here. So the first ones we'll talk about, Future Legend and Diamond Dogs. What were your thoughts?
So I think that this one, because this is one of the, like you had mentioned, this is like that concept album of it being originally written as a musical for on the book 1984 by George Orwell. And even though there's not like too many references to like 1984, like there is a little bit, but I felt like this was a really good intro song, thinking about setting us up for the like post-apocalyptic glam. Like literally, this is supposed to be like a post-apocalyptic like glam rock world that they're living in. And so I think that this kind of like sets us up for that, because it's not really like a musical song. It's more of like a like speech, I would say. I know that this is kind of a far out there reference. It may be an unpopular opinion, but this song and this album reminds me of what Lady Gaga's doing right now with Chromatica. And I'm not necessarily like a Lady Gaga fan. Like, I don't really listen to her as much, but what she's doing with Chromatica, like when I think about post-apocalyptic glitter apocalypse, is exactly what she's doing. And it's funny that I see this in Diamond Dogs by David Bowie, from 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, and for me, I actually... I love how the Future Legend kind of blends in the Diamond Dogs, because it reminds me of what Motley Crue did a few years after this with Shout at the Devil. The album Shout at the Devil had a very similar like intro that kind of set the mood before the opening track kicked in, and just this was one hell of a way to kick everything off. To your point, it is positioned kind of like the opening of what a musical would do. To your point also with 1984, he ultimately did not go ahead with the full musical plans that he had, because he was not able to get the rights from Orwell's estate. A couple of tracks later in the album were, as you mentioned, directly referenced that, but this is in the same vein, but not in reference to the actual story of 1984. But I mean, what can you say about Diamond Dogs that hasn't already been said either? I mean, this is if you're going to have a list of the greatest songs in rock history, this is going to be up there. Maybe not necessarily the top, but it's going to be in the top 20 at the very least.
Oh, 100%. One thing that I did read recently is that there's a little bit of a because of like copyright issues and when things become public domain, based on what year that comes out, that it came out in, whether it's 70 years or 90 years, and depending on like the copyright law that it was initially filed in the country that it was filed in, it can vary. So I found out that 1984 actually will be in the public domain starting next year, January 1st, 2021. 1984 will be in the public domain. So I think it would be so cool if we could see a David Bowie glitter apocalypse version of 1984.
That would kick ass. I mean, because you would think there must be some songs that he has that he had written down somewhere to kind of build up for this. It's not like he said, I want to do it, and with putting no work into it. And that, it will be different, of course, because other musicians would have to interpret what, his original intentions were, and who knows, quality-wise, if that would come out kind of the same way that he would do it. But I would definitely love to hear what those results would be. But any more thoughts on those first two tracks?
As far as like the next track, or like Diamond Dogs, because that's the second track in this, the lyric or the line that really just stuck with me, like the first one, this ain't rock and roll, this is genocide. Like, I don't know, to me, like that builds up what David Bowie was thinking of the time, and how 1984 and like Big Brother and the things that he saw related to this, that he saw in his own world related to this. And that was the line that stuck out to me the most.
Same here. I mean, starting out a song with that exclamation. I mean, the song could have easily failed, but it's Bowie at his absolute best here. So we'll move on to the next track. The next three tracks are kind of compose the same type of song, even though they're three separate tracks here. It's Sweet Thing, Candidate, and Sweet Thing Reprise. What were your thoughts?
I feel like on specifically Sweet Thing, I feel like because it's a little bit more, we get a little bit of like electronic, we get a little bit of piano, just kind of like lower notes, but then there's a build up with some chorus and some like background singing that builds up. But I feel like in Sweet Thing, we really hear David Bowie's vocal range in it. We really hear him like, I don't want to say like not straining, but we really hear him and his full vocal range, which is great, because especially compared to some of the like lower tones of Sweet Thing, and then Candidate is a little bit more like drums, and like I got the sense of either like a march of war or funeral drums, like dun dun. So like with some of those, and then the third song, Sweet Thing Reprise, I feel like is a combination of both of them, or I don't know if it would be considered like the radio edit of these, because we do see some of the same like lyrical content in all of it. But then like halfway through Sweet Thing, there's like a kind of a tone change where the beat gets faster, and then like towards the end, like I was listening to it and I could feel myself becoming anxious listening to it. And I think that when we think about like the psychology of what music can do to us, like, man, that song, I felt it in my bones. So like these three songs, I feel like you can't talk about one without talking about the other ones.
Yeah, same point here. I mean, it's this is probably my favorite part of the album right here. These three songs, Candidate especially. To your point, in these three songs, Bowie was all over the place, but in a good way. Just he would reach the highest highs and the lowest lows, and Candidate too. To your point, it was frenetic. It was just fast paced, and your heart rate would speed up along with the song. It's just just intense. And the guitar work on the song, the guitar work that closed the Sweet Thing Reprise too, it was moody. It wasn't like a Jimmy Page guitar solo, but it fit, if that makes sense. My favorite part of the album is going to be these three songs right here. So definitely love them. End of Sweet Thing Reprise leads to another Bowie classic, Rebel Rebel. What were your thoughts?
So this is obviously, out of the entire album, I think the most like recognizable song, and how it really fits into like the 1984 universe. Like you can kind of see it, but not. I'm trying to remember the lyric, but it's like, Rebel, rebel, are you a boy or a girl? Like thinking about that and thinking about what 1984 tells us about the role that you're supposed to play in society, and thinking about Rebel, rebel in this song, I think speaks to that, and how, like in these type of dystopian societies, anything that's outside of the normal is certainly punished, and it's encouraged that you tell on people who don't fit into these roles. But so I think that Rebel Rebel is one of those rare songs that has an upbeat attitude and has like a fun, catchy, like, oh, I'm dancing to Rebel Rebel, woo! But then when you listen to the lyrics, you're like, this is dark. Like, this is a lot darker than I thought. It is fun, but it's interesting to see how that the darkness of the lyrics and maybe the implications of the lyrics fit into this fun poppy song, which kind of has some themes in 1984 when we think about one of the terms double speak, which is used in propaganda and all of that. So I do think that once you get behind the poppy exterior, you really got to see the undertones, which was very intentional.
Exactly there. And also, in a lot of ways, it kind of showcased his expanding his musical repertoire. I mean, he was kind of shedding the aspects of what had made him famous up to that point, and kind of transitioning to a more tighter sound, a less echoey sound too, because a lot of the glam stuff that he did in the past did have more of an echo, where he did not do that with his later stuff, and it kind of showcased what music in general was transitioning to at that time. But just, I mean, what hasn't been said about Rebel Rebel? I mean, it's one of his classics, one of the best of rock and roll, period. But speaking of rock and roll, the next track, Rock and Roll With Me. What did you think?
So I don't really, I'll be honest here, like, I am a music consumer. I am not a music maker. I can't really tell you much about the instructions or the recipes to make music. But so knowing that, when I heard this song, and I can't even recall at what point, but there's like a melody or a beat that reminds me of Across the Universe by the Beatles. And that kind of like led me on this like weird Wikipedia rabbit hole. And I actually, so I really like, I enjoyed the song. Like, all of the songs are enjoyable. Mm-hmm. But I found out that he actually, his song Fame on Young Americans was co-written or written by John Lennon, and he actually covers Across the Universe on this album as well. So I don't know if, I think a lot of times whenever musicians are doing an album or they're coming up with a track list for the albums, there may be 10 or 12 songs that end up on the album, but they spend months and months and months in a record studio and like all of this coming up with stuff. So in my brain, like my conspiracy, what I imagine happened is that like maybe he was like playing Across the Universe and maybe it influenced this song. Maybe he recorded it while recording this album and then it ended up on Young Americans. But that's the little like rabbit hole that I went down when I was thinking about this song. Like, I heard it and I'm like, and so that's what I got out of this song, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, and with Lennon on Fame, you can Lennon actually sings the backup vocals on the Fame. You know, when Bowie says "Fame, Fame," and you hear the second Fame, that's Lennon singing there. But and yeah, David Bowie has made no secret about being a Beatles fan. Who wasn't a Beatles fan at that time? For this one, it's actually a song too, because the one thing I love about doing the album review, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I'm not a musician. I'm not a music maker myself, but I know what I like and I know what I don't like, and I also love being able to do research, do a deep dive. And I guess on this album was the first where I don't know what it's specifically called, but I believe William S. Burroughs did it. I know Tom York with Radiohead does it now as well, but essentially it's like David Bowie, what he did would write stuff out and then essentially cut up the lyrics and kind of reposition what he wrote to make something new. And this was one of those songs to where he did that. So it was great hearing kind of the nuts and bolts of how he was able to get that created. With the song Rock and Roll With Me, it was a little too 70s. I didn't dislike the song, but if, compared to the other songs on the album, I would not say that this is one of my favorite. This felt like it was probably if they were going to make a movie out of his proposed 1984 musical, I could see it make sense in a movie thing. But, this was not going to be one that, people were going to be, talking about 40 years down the road or 100 years down the road. Rock and Roll with Me? No, we don't. It's just one of his mediocre songs.
Yeah.
All right.
For sure.
The next one, We Are the Dead.
So this song for me, once again, having listened to the song before, but then really taking a magnifying glass to this, We Are the Dead, it ends up being the most sexually explicit song on this, and not necessarily that was weird, because I think that David Bowie was a very sexual person. You see it in his performance, and you just see what an icon he was. But it still has a very dark tone to it, despite some of the explicitness to it. But I still very, very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, this is another one that it didn't really tickle my fancy. I didn't particularly care for this. If anything, I think the mood of the song was a little darker compared to some of the other songs on there, and I think it's just the marriage of music with the music that he had for that particular song was just not in the right spot for my enjoyment. Doesn't mean it's bad, of course not, but it's also not ever going to be mistaken for his absolute best either. It's just a little bit of a mood piece for him, but leads us to the next song, 1984. What did you think about that one?
Now, 1984, this one definitely would be the title of the soundtrack, the leading song. It has that very funk inspired, the lyric beware the jaw of 1984, and so that's me doing a really bad impression.
Sounds like my Morrissey impression.
Oh gosh. So I think that with this song, this would be if it was in the musical, this would be almost the wacky part of the musical. There's a little bit of almost carnival music, horror funk vibe that's going on with this one. And so this one wouldn't necessarily be one that I would put on all the time and be yeah, I'm going to jam out to this song. But I could definitely see its place on the 1984 musical, theatrical. I just imagine everyone coming up on stage and 1984. So I could definitely see that vibe to it, especially as the title.
Nice jazz hands, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, the note I had is that if the themes to Ghostbusters and Shaft had a baby, it would be this song. And it just feels like a theme song. It's not bad, but the lyrics are inconsequential, essentially. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but just, sonically it sounded pretty good. I do like that, the funky sound, like you mentioned, and the guitars are great, but just the lyrics are too Broadway for my liking. And I also did note too that if there was a big 1984 musical to kind of see where its placement was, then I could probably have a little bit more of an appreciation for it. But being that this is kind of smack dab in the middle, similar to what the Who did with Who's Next. Their album Who's Next was supposed to be a big plan of theirs called Lifehouse. And, the songs on Who's Next were part of that big story and movie that they had planned, but without knowing the context of what they are in the movie, some of those songs just didn't hit as well as they could have, and I think that's where we're at with this. But still, not a bad listen. Leads us to the last two tracks here. Big Brother and Chant of the Ever-Circling Skeletal Family. What did you think about those songs?
So, I have to say that out of out of all the songs, maybe except like Rebel Rebel, just because like that's a like radio classic. Big Brother ended up being one of my favorites on this album, and I think what really got me was when at the beginning of this song you hear some like haunting like echo of like some jazz notes, and it reminded me of Blade Runner. Like the Blade Runner soundtrack by Vangelis is something that I regularly put on and listen to because it's fantastic. Like I love the mood that it sets. And so when I heard echoes, and to be clear, like this album came out in 74, Blade Runner didn't come out until 82, so obviously Blade Runner did not affect this song. However, Vangelis had a couple albums before this, so I don't know if there was any type of crossover or inspiration taken from it, but I got those vibes from Big Brother, and I really loved it, and like it was dark but still like electric and jazz, so I really enjoyed that. Now, the next song is the last song on the album, and not necessarily that it's a bad song, but the song technically ends like halfway through the song, and part of the song or part of whatever's going on is that it sounds like a record scratching, or like what I think of like a CD skipping.
Yeah.
And so I was listening to this and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, I'm listening to this digitally. Why am I hearing a CD scratch? And it's not. It's part of the song. And at first I'm like, man, this sucks. But when I think about what they were maybe trying to, like the mood that they were trying to set and like a record skipping, I could see, 50 years ago, I could see how that would kind of make sense. But I didn't care for the end of Chant of the Ever-Circling Skeletal Family, even as cool and, I feel like that should be the name of like a death metal band, and I really appreciate that. But this was probably the least favorite song on the soundtrack. So compared to Big Brother, which was like my favorite, and it really did the mood for me, especially thinking of Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies. That soundtrack is one of my favorite soundtracks. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is one of my favorite books by Philip K. Dick. So, and then thinking about like those things, and then thinking about this last song, I was like, but I get it. I understand maybe why it was put in there.
Well, the thing is, with that last track and that little bit at the end of the song, it's actually funnier when it's on LP, because with an actual record on a record player, with the way they made it, that little ending part of the song would continue until you took the needle off of the record. So in a way, it was put there more as a joke. I know the Beatles did something similar with Sgt. Pepper. At the end, there's a little vocal montage that they did that I guess people thought like Paul McCartney was saying like "Well, fuck you" like Superman in that song, which I don't know why, but that's what they were doing there, and I found that a little funny. The chant part, I actually dug it. I mean, it is very much a song of its time, but just sonically, I loved how it kind of ended things on a up tempo, I guess, if that makes sense, because when the times that we've done this segment on the show with albums, so the albums that I like more are ones that end on that have a proper ending. Now that does not mean they have to go out wild screaming, wild guitars or anything like that, but it has to be impactful, and I think that's where Big Brother and the chant song ended up fitting for me, and the guitars. You cannot go wrong with the guitars in this particular song. But what an album! It's one of David Bowie's classics for a reason. Definitely recommend you all check it out if you haven't done so already. I mean, I imagine if you listen to this show, you've probably heard a few David Bowie albums. But we have reached the end of our time here. I do thank you for joining us this week. Did you have anything you want to plug?
Not Normally at the end of things, I tend to shamelessly self-promote. However, I don't think that in the times that we're living in, I think that I would be remiss if I didn't promote something that went towards good. So find me on the interwebs if you so feel like you want to. However, if you would like to, I think that it would be much more important. There's a couple causes that are very special and like near and dear to my heart. There's one called, especially thinking about some of the topics that we discussed, there is the RAINN network, RAINN network, and they help survivors of sexual assault, incest, rape. So, even if you can't give money, even if you just want to go and see some of the work that they do, that would be incredible. Another one that is particularly important to me, especially right now, is the Equal Justice Initiative. So if you're going to take some time out of your day and you're going to find me, it would do better for me if you went and you looked up the Equal Justice Initiative, which helps wrongly convicted people seek justice. And a lot of times that disproportionately affects people of color. So the Equal Justice Initiative, and then the RAINN network, RAINN, which helps survivors of sexual assault and incest.
Yeah, definitely familiar with RAINN, their charity I've supported financially in the past myself. In the show description, especially if you are listening to the show with Apple Podcast, I will have links to websites for both the RAINN network and the other one as well. And it would just be a matter of tapping on that link. It'll bring you right to the page. And I believe you should be able to do that on stuff like Spotify and Google Play Podcasts as well. But the links will be there in our show description. We also have some links currently, supporting Black Lives Matter and all that stuff as well. So, we'll definitely have those up. Once again, thank you for being on, and you are welcome back at any time.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm very opinionated, and I love giving my opinion, and yeah. So thank you for having me on, because I do get to talk about. I do a weekly show on Longbox Paradox, which is on YouTube with my co-host Dan, and then I do my own thing on Comics Will Break Your Heart, and that's fun. But it's always fun to be on other people's shows and to maybe talk a little bit outside of my scope or in a different format. So, Tim, thank you for having me on, because I really appreciate that.
No problem. And I saw your ceiling there. It was a nice ceiling. All right, so thank you all again for listening, and we will see you next week. And remember,
it's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling. You're growing inside, and when you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, a very good feeling. The feeling you know that I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you, and you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too. You always make each day such a special day. You know how? By just your being you. Only one person in the whole world like you. That's you yourself. I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.